our next speaker is Frederik Obermaier, who is an investigative journalist of considerable international repute, also an old friend of the CIJ. He works for Munich's Süddeutsche Zeitung. We want to get that. Süddeutsche Zeitung. One of Germany's most distinguished investigative reporters, who won a Pulitzer Prize last year with his work with the ICIJ on the Panama Papers. So Frederik's come to talk to you about how to do good source protection in a digital age in which sometimes it feels like everything that we do leaves a trace. Frederik.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Frederik Obermaier. I'm working for Süddeutsche Zeitung. I know we should change the name. It's always causing trouble. Yeah, I'm standing here. I was invited to speak about source protection in the digital age, but I have to admit, I do not consider myself as a specialist. There are participants of this symposium that do know by far more about security and digital security. So the only thing that I can tell you is what or how we dealt with our source during the Panama Papers, the mistakes we made, what we learned, and I must say I'm still in a learning process. So yesterday I learned a lot at a panel, so please also feel free to interrupt you. The Panama Papers were only possible due to a brave whistleblower who only identified himself as John Doe when reaching out to my colleague Bastian Obermaier here on the left in an encrypted message and asking if we are interested in data. Of course we were. And I must admit I'm proud what the Panama Papers became, that it became an international project with so many journalists working on this stuff, keeping it secret. But the most important thing is that our source, John Doe, is, as far as we know, safe. The identity is not revealed, and I think, and there were no repercussions as far as we know. And I think that's something we cannot take for granted in these times. We have seen Chelsea Manning being imprisoned. We have seen a reality winner being imprisoned. We have seen the LuxLeaks whistleblower Antoine Deltour facing trial, and together with another LuxLeaks whistleblower, Raphael Halle, fighting a long fight in front of a Luxembourg judge. And they were in this trouble because their former employee, PwC, did a lot to find out who leaked this data, this revealing data to journalists. They hired, as far as we know, a digital forensics team and went out after them to basically find out who had access to that files and who handed it over. We had seen the Russian doping whistleblowers, Yulia Stepanova and Gregory Rodchenko, living in forced exile in the USA, basically in hiding. We have seen the whistleblower Edgar Matsubato in the Philippines, who blew the whistle on Mr. Duterte and is now also living in hiding. And first and foremost, we're living in a world of mass surveillance, where governments and also private companies like Google are trying to track and map every step of every one of us. And I don't have to tell you that, especially for journalists, this is a huge danger. I personally would have loved to talk about the protection of a source in the analog time, because I still prefer receiving envelopes, but I realize it's getting less and less. So I'm speaking a little bit about source protection in the digital age. I think what we learned during the Panama Papers is that it is important to be reachable, meaning that you put as many ways out there to be contacted as possible. Not only your PGP key, your Signal account. I realized that this is something many journalists do not want, especially, for example, female investigative journalists, because this means handing out your cell phone number, and if it's also the one that you use not only for signal, receiving signal messages from sources, then that causes a problem. I think we should put out as many ways to be contacted, because PGP might be a good way of communication, but I experienced it many, many times that if you tell a source after the first contact, let's switch to PGP, you hear or read something like, PGP what? And if you then try to explain it and point to the numerous guides out there, people still don't understand it. So I think we have to not only focus on one way of communicating in a secure way, but on numerous ways. That could be signal, it could be Threema, and other ways of communication. The only thing that I do not and would not recommend is, I see many investigative journalists being on Facebook, and I think that is tempting for potential sources. So that's why you won't find me on Facebook, and I realized that, and I had those discussions with colleagues, that this means that there are less people approaching me. But I think it's important because I don't want a powerful company like Facebook knowing who contacted me, and maybe by simply not knowing, revealing something in a Facebook message that nobody apart from this person and me should know. When John Doe approached us, this person made quite clear that he or she, I still don't know who it is, does fear for his life. And at the beginning, this was a sentence for me, but it became a real burden, because when we found members of Mexican drug cartels in the data, when we found the best friend of Vladimir Putin in the data, this sentence became real. And it also meant that we had long communication with John Doe about what to do. And we also had that communication if we maybe should stop it. And I think that's something as a journalist who wants to put out a story, who wants to reveal wrongdoings, this is always the most difficult part. Because I think we have to be aware that there are stories out there that are of public interest and that we would like to publish, but that would definitely bring a source into danger. So we had this discussions about risks, about protection. And it was not only easy communications, because sometimes you also have to go through life-saving protection mechanisms, and that's something that you don't want to put a whistleblower on this topic. I think it should also mean that even before a publication, we should have a discussion with our sources if they want to stay anonymous or not. I think it was a wise decision of John Doe to stay anonymous, but I think that's a decision every whistleblower has to make on his own, because that's a decision we as journalists cannot make, because if we decide that a source shall stay anonymous, this source has its own will and could step out. So we should speak about potential legal risks. We should also speak about lawyers putting out contact details to organizations that help whistleblowers and that are good in doing so. But first and foremost, in the daily work with a whistleblower, I think we must be careful. And careful at the beginning of the Panama Papers meant for us, we put the hard disk with the data in a vault. Of course, this was not enough, and we realized it pretty soon. So we bought new equipment, got a new specially secured room in our building, got new computers that were air-gapped. We had a discussion with our security team about who can enter rooms, because I think that's something, especially those working in bigger media outlets know that there's always someone with a key to all the offices. and we tried to prevent that, meaning in the end that we had a room that was not cleaned for over 10 months. And that was the bad part of it. For us, it also meant reaching out to specialists, because we as journalists, I think we are the weak point in this relationship. Journalists tend to think that we know everything, and that we know everything better than others, and we have to be aware that's not the case. So we, for example, learned about nail polish during the Panama Papers. When we spoke to experts that recommended us to put glitter nail polish on all the screws on our computers to realize if somebody's tampering with it while we're not in the room. And I think we should be open with these discussions. You don't have to reveal what you're working on, but there are so many great journalists and great security experts who are willing to share. And I think that's good because we are living now in a community, I think, where we are all aware of the risk of whistleblowers, so we should not be ashamed by simply asking a colleague, even if he's from a competing outlet, for help in this regard. And I think we should also think about covering our tracks. Even after a publication, there is a risk. Even if a whistleblower is not found or identified after a first publication, it does not mean that he or she still isn't in a year. So we basically destroyed our or most of our hardware because we were not sure if there were not traces that could lead to John Doe. Of course, this means like a financial loss, and you have to explain it to your bosses. I think we had a loss of several thousand euros in equipment that we destroyed afterwards, but I think it's important. And I think that's money we should all spend. I think we should also, especially when dealing with an anonymous source, you should also think about what to do after a communication, after a publication. What if somebody in this audience is approaching me today? Hey, I'm John Doe. You should communicate with your source beforehand if there's a way to identify yourself, even if it's an anonymous source where you don't know the identity. I just received the sign that I shall come to an end, so I say thank you, and I didn't mean it. If you have any questions, come to me, and I'm happy to share what we learned during the Panama Papers, and I hope that others can tell me after this speech or note what we may have missed and where we could learn more, because I think it's for the sake of people that risk a lot and that in many cases risk their lives. And I think that's worth the time for us journalists. Think about it even more, exchange ideas to save whistleblowers, because unfortunately this job is what governments do not do currently. And that's what pisses me off.